How many meetings have you been in lately where you felt engaged, got a lot done, and thought it was time well spent? Chances are your answer is not many or none. My returning guest, Adam Lawrence, thinks we can supercharge our productivity and get a lot more out of our meetings by infusing them with what he calls doing, not talking. Adam is a master facilitator, author, and educator who works with private and public sector organizations around the world. He weaves together techniques from the world of psychology, design, improv, and theater to offer a unique approach to help teams open more channels of communication beyond talking and get a lot done very fast. In this episode, Adam and I unpack what doing, not talking looks like, how we can accelerate communication, alignment, and work within a team, the power of building to think, how what he calls investigative rehearsals supercharges our work, and why running small experiments is one of the best ways to reduce risk. Let's dive in. Adam, welcome back to Making Business Art. So good to see you.
Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
Yes. So this is the second time we record this
Mm,
conversation because the first
mm.
time technology totally failed us.
Technology, it just works. Yeah, it
After
didn't
the
totally
fact,
fail, which was the irritating part. It was there, but there was a
yes.
bug. It wasn't quite right. It's one of the decisions you make in design, in art. Is this good enough for now? And we decided no, it wasn't. So
It was. That's right. So, so previously you were with us here in Making Business Art on episode 11, where we spoke about theatrical methods for innovation. We had a long form conversation. We got into nooks and crannies. We spoke about all kinds of things, including your medieval hobby where you sword fight and you beat your friends with a club.
yeah, with a piece of wood. It's kind of club-like. Yeah, yeah. And we call it a baton. Yeah, so it's a
And
medieval
and you
tournament.
reminded me that you do it in nourishing and loving ways.
Very loving way. It's a fantastic sport. Imagine a sport with 2,000 fighters on the field, all going hell for leather at each other, and no referee necessary because we look after each other. There are safety
Mm.
folks who look out for things we might miss, like a missing piece of armor and so on. But there's no one out there saying you won and you lost because we trust each other and take care of each other. I think it's beautiful.
And you like legit know sword fighting, right?
Well, what is legit sword fighting? I mean, there are modern sports of sword fighting, like
Okay.
fencing and so on. There are people who try to recreate medieval styles from,
Mhm.
well, let's say historical styles from around the world. How do you do that? You pick up a sword and see what works. Then you
Mhm.
might end up killing people. Or do
Mhm.
you look at the old manuals and see what they were doing? But is it really what they were doing? Or were these manuals some kind of sales brochure?
Yeah.
So it's actually, there are many, many ways up this mountain. The way that I do it is we pick up some approximations of swords, these batons, which have about the right weight and about the right balance, and then we see how can I hit somebody with the edge of this, and
Mm.
we mix in any source that we can find and see what works. It's a very pragmatic approach. It's not a sort of academic researching approach. It's more a prototyping approach.
There you go. Well, that's just a little hint of how nerdy Adam
I
can
am,
get.
I am, I am white and nerdy. Yeah, I'm there. I'm there. Yeah.
Okay. But the topic of the day is something near and dear to your heart, which is doing, not talking.
Mm.
And I think that is a topic that bears repeating. And henceforth, we shall talk about that today. But before we do that, for the people who do not know you, can you just remind people what do you do for work and what do you help your clients accomplish?
Sure. So I'm based in Germany, working pretty globally, and we generally help people to get better at helping other people. Some folks call that service design or innovation or design thinking or HCD or holistic UX and so on. Most organizations are trying to create value and either make money or save the world. And they're trying to do that through helping people do stuff. And we often do that in ways that we think are the right way, but maybe they could be better. And maybe we can get better at getting better at that. So we're kind of working on a meta level, not doing projects with organizations, but showing them, okay, this is how you can shape a project. These are useful behaviors, techniques, tools, and so on. Now go. And that's a lot of fun to do. I'm also well known for a couple of books. This is Service Design Doing. This is Service Design Methods, and for a thing called the Global Service Jam, which I set up with my colleague Marcus back in 2010. 2011 was the
Mm,
first one, and it's still going. Lots of fun with that.
very well. Yeah, I have hosted 7 of those. So,
I'm very
and
grateful to
that's
you.
that's that's how we met,
It is.
actually. Great. Well, you do something very disruptive, which is you deprive people of the joy of having a 3 hour meeting where people talk and then they go away from the meeting and nothing changes. And then they
Yeah.
have that same meeting 12 to 24 times a year and everybody tears their
Repetitive.
hair
Yeah.
out. And they
Mm.
enjoy that very much apparently. But you come in
Hmm.
and you say like, no, no, no. Don't talk. So what is this doing, not talking thing? Like let's open it up there.
I think you summed it up really well. What very much interests me in the practice of design, and I've nothing against talking, of course, it's an amazing invention language, but it's only one way of communication. It's only one way of making decisions, only one way of figuring things out. But it's very, very dominant in our culture. I think it was Sting who said poets, priests, and politicians are the people who run the world. Yeah. And
Mhm.
they're all word strong. They're all
Mhm.
very good with language, and that could be written language, it could be the language of Visio and PowerPoint, or it can be getting up and speaking. And there's nothing wrong with that skill, but there are other people in organizations who have other ways of communicating, other things they can do well. They can show you something, or they can build you something, or they can run experiments, and they can take you and lead you through a thing. And that's very, very interesting too. It's particularly interesting because of some of the bugs around language. Language is incredibly foggy at times. I'll say a thing and you'll understand it in a certain way. And usually your understanding of it might be different from my way of thinking, but it avoids a conflict between us. So we take that sort of fuzz to help us avoid conflict or avoid sharpness, which of course at times is very, very useful. But if we're trying to actually build a new future, at some point we need to get precise. And that either means that we adopt more and more precise language, which again favors people who are word strong, or we say, well, let's just build it. And very often I've seen people who'll discuss a thing for a long time, will start to build it in a prototype form, even just sketch it out. And very, very soon will say, oh, what are you doing? Well, this is what we said. No, it's not. And so I'm thinking, why not start that earlier?
Mhm. Mhm.
The other big thing about this is honestly, everything works in PowerPoint. I can have whatever plan I want for the world. I can make a PowerPoint, I can make a fake Excel sheet about it, and it looks like it's going to be an absolute rock and roll success. And
Mhm.
reality is much, much harder. So my practice is all about getting into reality as fast as possible. Using words to shape that, certainly, but trying to find other ways of communication which are not just the verbal and the semantic. And to be more attached to reality and less attached to opinion. And I kind of round all that up. We, my friend Marcus, is part of this as well, and the whole Jam community, the phrase of doing, not talking. It doesn't mean we work in silence. That's going to be a useful technique sometimes, but generally it means where can we shift away from words and opinions towards realities and experiments?
Yeah. Something I've been thinking about lately is how words in themselves, they're really like a tool to point to something, but the experience of said thing can be different for different people. So say in the, pardon me here, the on PC old term for this, but there's people who have like color blindness. I think
Mm-hmm.
there's a new term for that that's more polite. There's people that have the normal three cones for color reception in
Mm-hmm.
their eye. And then some time ago, I learned that some people have a mutation that they have a fourth cone
Mm-hmm.
in their eye, and those people tend to see more variation and more detail in color. And I think it was a podcast, and in there they were saying that that mutation tends to show up more commonly in women, and people with that mutation somehow it's common for them to find they're living in like design, in the
Mm-hmm.
design
Oh,
arenas,
interesting. Interesting.
interior design, etc. And so three people can be looking at a thing, and one person's colorblind, the other person's like hyper color perceptive, and then another
Mm-hmm.
person who's like quote unquote normal. And yeah, so the very experience of the thing is just very different for the three people. And I think a great way to figure that out quickly and accelerate that communication is to go experience the thing and like touch it and kind of be very embodied about it. So this doing not talking approach, I found it to be very helpful in accelerating communication.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell me more about that? How does it accelerate a communication? Like, and what channels of like what different channels open up when you take the doing not talking approach?
I think there are two main things which are very interesting. The first one is around the thing itself. If you and I are describing a thing, whether it's in words or in a vision statement or in PowerPoint or whatever, there's so much wiggle room in there. It's very, very different if we just start to actually at least sketch out, or better still, physically build some approximation of the thing. It just saves time. I remember meeting a guy on a train, and he'd had an idea for a new optical instrument. His company sold optical instruments, and he had this prototype builder make this thing. It took like 7 weeks to build, a long time investment in a project. Not too much money, but a few thousand or something. But still. And then he showed it to his sales team, and they said, too big. And it was like, how much time did you waste by thinking too long and having too much of a formed opinion about this thing, and then contracting a special builder to make the thing rather than bringing a cardboard box on the first day and save yourself 7 weeks and a few $1,000s. So the handling the content, the thing, is really, really important. Once we start building, sketching with code, whatever we're doing, we have a very clear understanding about what the thing might be. And in other terms, what IDEO calls thinking with our hands starts to happen. Often we'll start ideation in our practice with a round of silent building. So people work in silence for a while, and they build stuff with cardboard or building bricks or whatever it is, whatever's available to hand. And they haven't even talked about the thing yet. They have to explore it in physical space, in a creative act, rather than a referencing act or a descriptive act. And that's very, very interesting. So that's happening. We're getting much more clarity and progress in our thinking about the thing itself through doing. The other one is we are communicating between ourselves on a different level as well. My things I talk about often sound very woo, and that worries me. Yeah, I have a background in psychology, and I always say there are two types of psychologists. There are the guys with the T-shirt that says "I'm okay" and "you're okay." Then there are the guys with the white coats and the chemicals. I'm the second type. I was an evidence-based psychologist in my short academic career, and I don't sort of talk about things which don't have some kind of evidential basis. Yeah. But we do know that when we are in communication with people, it's not just words. They seem to be quite unimportant in terms of communicating sympathy and feelings around things, whether I want to communicate that or not. That goes through paraverbal and verbal and paraverbal and nonverbal cues more often. Things like timing, things like hesitancy, body language, people leaning in, leaning out, and so on. There's a lot of communication around my emotional life and my attachment to things going on while we're building, which I think is often quite hidden when we're using words more, because we try to sound enthusiastic and use the right words and so on. And when they're taken away, when they're less focused on, and there's more focus on the action of what we're doing, I believe we actually communicate better, or at least we communicate in a way which serves different people. And I'm very interested in that, in all that knowledge locked up in different parts of the organization by people who are not good at standing in front of a group and speaking.
Yeah. Well, also for people who don't know you, you also have a pretty robust background in theater and comedy. And both theater and comedy, obviously, they're art forms that are thousands of years old, and they're very effective at steering things inside of people and getting people, moving people emotionally and physically. Can you say a little bit more about how that informs, like what you were just explaining?
Hugely. I mean, many years ago, it's 2007, 08, something like that, my colleague Marcus and I started working in what we then call customer experience. Yeah. And I'm still very interested in the experiential side of the work we do as designers. And a friend of ours had said, put your money where your mouth is. I'll give you some of my people and you can work with them and train them on customer experience. And literally the day before, Marcus said, what are we doing tomorrow? What are we going to do with these people? We've got 18 smart people from a great company, and what are we going to do? And I said, what we always do, we rehearse. Yeah? And rehearsal is a really, really interesting word. It's massively misunderstood outside theater. If you go to the State Theater here in Nuremberg, beautiful theater, you go down one corridor, and on one side of the corridor, it has rehearsal rooms, and on the other side, practice rooms. They're not the same thing, and people confuse them. Yeah. I'm told that rehearsal, the word rehearsal, comes from the old French word for a rake, the garden implement. So you're raking over things. You're digging and you're rearranging and you're smoothing and you're digging again. And when we rehearse something, we are not trying to solidify the thing. We are trying to explore a thing by doing, exploring by doing. And that is a massively productive, incredibly effective, and generous work form. We will be rehearsing, let's say, a service experience, and we will be touching on questions of behavior, questions of language, questions of architecture, questions of process, questions of contracting, legal aspects, systems, backends, immediately within a few minutes of rehearsal of this. And when we're doing all that around an exemplary, or rather an example of an experience. Yeah. So we are seeing, well, what's important in this moment? And what I find super important about theatrical rehearsals, and we have a method we call investigative rehearsal, which is basically applying that to design questions, is that you're actually feeling emotion. People actually get angry. They actually get frustrated. They don't just talk about, this annoys me. They bang their fist on the table. Yeah. Because we know, and again, this is not woo, we know that when we move our body through familiar patterns, we feel the emotions. The amplitude is lower, but it's all the same biochemical, physiological, electrochemical responses happening in our body. And that's really huge. It means that we're prototyping emotion. We're actually saying this feels good, this feels weird, this feels wrong, this feels too soon, this feels too late. Those things are really coming up, not on an intellectual level, which is also important, but on an emotional level, a gut level. And if we're really interested in being human-centric or customer-centric, then I believe the center of a human is their emotional life. And we should be addressing that. And theater is this extraordinary industry, 3,500 years old in the East, a bit younger in the West, which has this massively pragmatic approach to creating value, which is designed, or which has evolved to incorporate artists, technicians, business folks, customer-facing folks, and so on, to incorporate them all in the same process, basically through a system of shut up and show me. And I think that's incredibly valuable, and we can learn a lot from that.
Yeah. It also, I think it points to, I think, a really productive way to approach work, because a lot of our decision making is based on emotions, as shown by neuroscientists like, oh gosh, Thomas, no, I'm blanking on this person's name. Anyway, Tomasio, shoot, having a
We'll come
senior
back.
moment. Having a senior moment here.
Oh, yeah.
At any rate, but yeah, there's neuroscientists who have shown that, like, if some of the emotional circuits in the brain are injured, those people can weigh pros and cons all day long, but they just can't really make a decision. So it kind of points to the importance of emotions in decision making. And then if you talk to leaders, as much as people like to talk about data, they'll say, like, well, it's at the end, it's a gut decision. Like you that's pretty common. If somebody, is honest and they're kind of have confidence, they know you, they're comfortable with you, they'll probably own up to that. The other thing that I was thinking about is, as I'm hearing you share this, is you were saying, like, things look good on PowerPoint, and I think the parallel to the rehearsal is lyrics on a page or dialogue on a page.
Oh, yeah.
And okay, well, that's great, but how do you make that come to life? And there's tone and volume and gestures and silence. So there's only no doing, but there's also the not doing, kind of the pauses in between the action to let something come forth, or, I don't know, drive a point, or any number of things.
I think an important part of
Yeah.
that, if I can interrupt your train of thought, apologies,
Yeah.
is it's how do you make that come to life is different from how I make that come to life. And you'll
True.
see this, you see different actors performing the same role, saying exactly the same words, or even the same actor at a different point in their life. You see, we have great actors who we've been able to watch their careers in cinema and so on for years and years, some of them going back to the same roles. And how different it is when they have that life experience behind them, and often an implied character life experience as well. We know on stage, I've done some shows hundreds of times, and in theory, they should all be the same. I stand in the same place, say the same words in the same direction to the same colleagues. Yeah.
Hmm.
They're different every night because the audience is part of that co-creation as well. And they respond differently to different things. And then the cast will automatically adjust the way they play to emphasize this and distract from that or whatever it is. You echo back from each other and create an amazing evening, or not, or you flop horribly, whatever. But that's really important. That idea that when we introduce new processes, systems, experiences into organizations, how does that actually happen? Very often there's a degree of sort of instruction given to staff members. Some technology will change, a form will change, or a web page will change, or a system of questions on a pad will change, and then it's get out there and do it. And there's this sort of belief it's going to be the same for each of these hundreds or thousands or tens of members of staff who are doing this, and it's not. They're all going to find their own voice around that. And I find it very interesting to use things like rehearsal to give staff members also a chance to find their own voice in something.
Mm.
Some people outside theatre see the lines that we have as a straitjacket, and if they're bad, they can be. But they really can be. But with a great or a good or great author, the lines are not a straitjacket. They're a scaffold you can climb up. Yeah, and you can get higher than you could without them. And so I have this amazing scaffolding, and I add to that my own interpretation, my own uniqueness. And I think it's fantastic when members of staff get to do that as well. I think how important individual members of staff are in the success of organizations, whether it's nursing staff, it's often these frontline people. It's often not the big bosses or the super experts. It's not the surgeon, it's the nurse. Yeah, it's not the principal, it's the teacher. These kind of people who are so important to the experience people have, giving them a chance to not just be themselves, but to have something to even make a better performance, using that word carefully, from, I think is incredibly interesting and very rewarding to folks as well when they say, oh, I can be myself here. I can do a great job. I can live this role.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like a really effective way of opening up space for people to, to express themselves and to, maybe this is not the right word to have authorship, but like participation or
I
some
think authorship's a
ownership
great word. Yeah. Yeah.
in in the, in the making this thing come alive. Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I remember Lufthansa and Ideal chatting with them about a project they did, 10 years ago now, I think, maybe a
Mm.
little longer, with the Lufthansa business class, and building a plane on the ground in Frankfurt and flying this plane across the Atlantic without leaving the ground, with working kitchens, working entertainment, the whole thing, so that they could explore new ways to improve their business class without changing the seats, the menus, the plane, anything like that. And hundreds of staff actually having the chance to try different things, cabin staff, but also then ground staff or back office staff. I'll have a go as well. Let me try. Let's see what we can learn from each other. And some of these folks you see, and this is what I like about things like airlines, is I often realize, especially the good ones, that their frontline staff are rock stars, and they're incredibly important to the experience. I remember being on a Delta flight years and years ago, and they had a color code for the uniforms. I think they've changed since then. They had a color code at the time, but not a specific uniform code. And so the staff were all doing this sort of gray and red thing. And there was a lady on there who had the most amazing red hat. Yeah. And she, a cabin stewardess, and she rocked that hat. Yeah. Like she would rock it at a nightclub. And I think that was a small example of how you can let people be themselves and have a greater impact. And I think it's genuinely more satisfying as well. She's going to stay longer than someone who feels constrained by the systems that they're in, rather than lifted by them.
Yeah. So we're talking about doing, not talking. And so we're touching on the doing, but at some point there's some talking.
Sure.
So the talking part of the doing, not talking. Well, we're talking about not talking, but talking has to happen at some point. Is there any nuance or distinction about how you do approach the talking when talking needs to happen?
I think this is the thing which is common to both theatre and art and design. is the idea of the boundary object. Yeah, is a very difficult conversation. It's a very different conversation that we have when we are using words if we're standing around a thing and pointing at it, especially a thing that we've built together. Now, that thing might not mean anything to anyone outside the group because it's too rough and too scribbly or whatever. But to us who've made it, it's packed with information. And interestingly, it's often packed with information which we can't put into words. I am a bit obsessed with this idea, with the fact that many of the most important things that we need to work with as designers are implicit. They don't fit on a post-it. They might fit into a sonnet maybe or a novel, yeah, but they don't fit into a research report. But we have to manage that. We have to take the gut feelings and so on that we get from research and from experiment, and we have to pass them further into the team. And we do that by building prototypes, by making experiential moments or objects that people can interact with and pick up some of that instinct and gut and so on that we couldn't express through words. So when we are having that conversation, it's a conversation on more channels. It's a conversation through the words that we're using, but also through the thing that we've built and which we're handing backwards and forwards to each other or clicking on or whatever it is or walking through. And that's a very different conversation. Even just a simple visualization. I remember working with in a non-design context with a client once in a consulting gig and drawing out a storyboard of the thing we were planning. And they were just blown away. Just having a simple visualization, a freaking comic strip, yeah, of the 12 things that were going to happen on that day we were planning, rather than just an agenda. They found it so much easier to orient themselves. Where are we right now? Because you pointed a picture, it's easier to read a picture than read words. You boom, 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 boom. They saw, people are sitting for a long time, aren't they? Yeah. Now, what else can we do in this moment? So you've superpowered, you've supercharged the conversation by having that boundary object, and it's doing some communication for you in itself as well, communicating things that you can't do well during using words.
It's amazing. Earlier this year, my friend, I have a friend, Vaijanti, who's a business anthropologist, but also somebody trained in classical Indian dance. She grew up in Chicago, but her parents are migrated from India. And she introduced me to a concept of this ancient, I don't know if it's Hindu, but people of South Asia, this concept of rasa. So it's RASA. Look it up on Wikipedia. And I'm not going to do this justice right here, but it basically, that concept points to the kind of some ephemeral feeling or sensation or state that that somebody feels when they encounter art. So it's this state of being that arises in an audience. And so if you look at the Wikipedia entry, if you read down like the bottom of the first paragraph or so, and then it says that rasas are produced by the state of mind of the artist. And then to me, that also has resonance with like a fairly well-known quote from Steve Jobs, where he says, something to the effect of when we make something with a great deal of care and love, something's transmitted there that the audience feels or perceives in some way. And I find resonance between those things, between those two things, but also in what you're saying, it is like an intangible, but it's so important. And I think that's one of the things that gets people to go line up around the building when a product on an album or concert tickets are released, because it's something that's really hard to like pinpoint or measure, but it's very powerful because it moves people into action. That's I'm very curious about that.
Absolutely, and it's so hard to put into words. I mean, I'm sitting here at my window. A few kilometers away. There are two large German sport fashion manufacturers. Yeah, one with stripes, one with a cat. Yeah, and we've worked with both of them, and we helped one of them build their makerspace. Yeah, a few years ago, which is super interesting because for those in sport fashion, what's cool and what's not cool, it's almost impossible to describe in words. But you see the folks there in the makerspace, and they have this incredible like wall of rolls of materials. Yeah, I mean, like your fabric store on to the power of 3, and they are running around going, yeah, and then and this, yeah, and huh, and they're but more, and they're literally like
Mhm.
rubbing pieces of cloth together and going, you see what I mean? Yeah, yeah, but it's there's also some, and they grab a, I don't know, a piece of sole material, rubber, yeah, and they're not actually proposing making a shoe, for example, out of those three materials. They are communicating around the mood they're trying to get.
Mhm.
And they're doing that entirely through holding pieces of cloth in front of each other. You see it happen over and over again. And of course, they have mood boards and so on as well, and
Mhm.
they do try to express what they're aiming for in often quite short phrases, sort of design principles or whatever. But so much of it depends on having that material there and rubbing it and holding it in front of each other,
Absolutely.
because they're dealing with a thing that you can't put into words, and you can only do that by doing.
Totally. So now I'd like to talk about enrolling people into doing not talking.
Mm,
And so something that happens that we both and everybody listening has come across is that starting from a young age in our education system, we're taught to think, right? We live above the neck, a lot of
yep.
us. We live up in our heads. And so it's the PowerPoint, everything's done on paper. We talk about things to no end. And I even remember like there's a friend, this lady who's a number of years ahead of me. She's more senior, who she's part of this consortia of facilitators that what they do is that they design conversations all about talking, and they're
Mm,
very cerebral people.
mm,
And when she first met me, she kind of poo-pooed the service, the spirit, I'm sorry, of the service jam and the
mm.
doing not talking. And then she came to a service jam with a lot of skepticism. I think she came to kind of explore, but maybe to shoot it down,
Which is fine.
to wag the finger at me.
Yeah.
And then she at the beginning she was like, well, these people are not talking about anything. They don't understand what they're doing. Like how blah, 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 blah. And I was like, well, just hang, just participate. Just see what happens. And then at the end, she's like, oh, I see. They're getting somewhere by making these things.
Hmm.
So she started to see it, but I think she was too proud to admit to give it full credit. So I'm sure you've come across leaders that are
Mm.
resistant to that. And so that's going to be the first wall of resistance. So let's explore that just for a couple of minutes. How do you enroll the people who they cross their arms? They're like, we just
Yeah,
want to talk about this
that's
for three
that.
hours and look at PowerPoint.
That's absolutely true, and those people have had a lot of success doing that. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's what's brought them to where they are. So, in their mind, it works really well because they've seen years and years of success doing that. It's also their safe place, and they know that they can BS their way out of almost anything, you know, or have a great killer argument for anything, or probably some combination of the two. So, sure, that's been successful for them. And I don't want to take that away from anybody, but it's not always the best mode of collaboration, and it's also not always the best way of dealing with reality, because reality is complex and fast moving. A lot of it for me in my facilitation practice, I talk a lot about first order constructs and second order concepts, and second order concepts, which is a design research term. First order concepts are things that you can see and touch and listen to. They are objective observations. Yeah, like people have their arms folded. Okay. And then you have the second order concepts. This is from Van Marnen in the 80s, I think. Second order concepts, which are things which I assume that means. People are, first order concept, arms are folded. Second order concept, they're resisting me. Okay. That's an assumption. That's a subjective assumption rather than an objective observation. That might be true. They might be resistant, might not be cold. Yeah. It could be simple as that. But what I find is very, very useful is to address the first order concept. So if people's arms are folded, give them something to do with their hands. If they are sitting back in their chairs, take the chairs away. In our space in Nuremberg, our main lab space, we have no chairs. We have a sofa and we have some very uncomfortable cardboard blocks you can sit on for a few minutes, then your butt gets sore and you get off them and you move around again. So when I find if people are disengaged, people say to me, Adam, what do I do when folks are disengaged? I say, well, what do disengaged people look like? Well, they're sitting down with their arms folded. They are frowning. Okay, what do engaged people look like? Well, they're moving around. They're talking to each other, making eye contact. They're touching things, moving things, shaping things. Okay, well, move them around, get them to talk to each other, get them to touch things, move things, and shape things, and you'll find they become engaged. It's almost stupidly simplistic, but it works. So yeah, create a space where there are no fixed seating areas.
Yeah.
It's also harder to change my mind if I sit in the same chair all day. I mean, there's studies on that. So why have chairs? If we have a situation whereby there is a clear position of authority in the room next to a flip chart or something, where I can stand and be the speaker, then have 6 flip charts. Then there's no longer a speaker. So a lot of it for me is physical. I spend a lot of time. I really annoy all my colleagues because when I enter a room, they know I'm going to change something. I'm going to move a chair, move the tables, move the chairs around. Might be a few inches here or there, but it makes a difference. I learned this in working in restaurants. A little bit of table spacing makes a huge difference to the effect, the success of an evening. And do that. And if that's not enough, then I've learned from my great colleague Renata Sergenrod, who's a brilliant facilitator, be curious. Just be genuinely, openly curious of people. You don't seem to be seeing what you're expecting to see here. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. So one last stop, because we're going to run out of time soon. One last stop is that this might be evident to the audience by now, but this can be very playful. And I always think of John Cleese, who's just from Monty Python, The Fawlty Towers, if you know The Fish Called Wanda, or any number of other movies. John Cleese is a great comedian and thinker who emphasizes relaxation, but something he talks about is the distinction between being serious and being solemn. And we can work on tremendously serious things in very playful ways. So that part of the playfulness of what you do, that can also maybe be scary to some people who live up in their heads. So just the last stop here in the conversation before we let you go, like how do you approach that and how do you enroll people and make it invite them into that world of being more playful and more serious in a playful way?
Yeah, you're getting to a very, very core aspect of my practice here, which I can talk about for hours and bore everyone with. But in terms of the short answer, what those folks have experienced success within their life has been in being cerebral and being abstract and in being to a degree philosophical, and careful. So if I want people to do stuff which doesn't seem like that, I need to describe it at least in that way. So for example, I do some pretty crazy activities with people for reasons, during work sessions. And you might see a very similar activity even before as a party game. Yeah. You might see it being called an icebreaker or a warm-up. But if I'm doing that with the people who are cerebral and careful, then something like saying a warm-up or an icebreaker will not seem interesting or relevant. It seems like not working to them. But if I say, let's try some brain training, suddenly that thing becomes interesting. I'd like to do a simulation with you. Could we do a short experiment based on my psychology background? Yeah. If I put it in that language, which is cerebral and careful and all those things, then sure, that's fine. I wear a suit at work. I'm wearing a t-shirt today to talk to you, but I wear a suit at work because it's much easier to show up looking like a business person with the books and various titles I have and so on. I can use all those things and then be silly than it is to show up being silly and then try to get back that sort of gravitas when you need it. Yeah. So I work in a suit with a rubber chicken in my pocket, but the rubber chicken doesn't come out in the first morning usually. It comes out later on when people have already had their buy-in. The upshot of this is if you want freedom, you need to ask for it in the language of structure. You need to use words like, rather than saying, let's try something, you say, let's do a controlled experiment on this. Rather than saying, let's see what happens. Let's say, you might say, let's observe the results carefully. They mean the same thing, but one of them feels safe to a certain type of person who are otherwise not very comfortable doing things which are more explorative, more unpredictable, more fuzzy.
Yeah,
but reality is explorative, unpredictable, and fuzzy.
The magic of language. I think I shared this with you previously, but I'll share it here again. When I was at a conference once where the magician David Copperfield was speaking, and then at the end, during the talk, he kept referring to himself as being an illusionist. So during the Q&A, somebody came up and said, like, well, what's the difference between a magician and an illusionist? And without missing a beat, he said $20,000. So yeah, so that language, that play with the language, that's its own, it has its own magic and purpose and skill behind it. Adam, thank you so much for being on here.
Thanks for having me again.
So let me just open up the floor here. Like, why or who should look you up, for what reasons, and where can they find you?
Anyone who likes to chat. I'm always happy to chat about stuff that I do. I'm most often involved in helping organizations get better at creating value by being more experimental, more down to earth, more explorative, but also doing that within the realms of things like budgets and things like roadmaps and legislation. All those realities don't go away. So it's freedom within structure.
Yeah.
So if organizations are interested in exploring that to become more successful by doing that better, they can chat to me.
And what might be 2 or 3 problems that are kind of common coming up from clients or from the market for you right now that might inspire somebody to look you up?
Very often there's something new coming up. Yeah, there's a new challenge coming. Not just more of the old stuff, that we can help with that as well, but often it's more, there's a legislation coming, there's a threatening technology, there's a new market opportunity or a new market threat coming up. And we'd like a more robust way of approaching that, which is not putting a big bet onto one thing, but actually more sensibly developing a portfolio of options and then experimenting our way forward with those. Or it quite often is something like, yeah, we've got this thing and we think it's really cool, but it doesn't really rock. It's okay, it doesn't really rock. Yeah. And that can be a great starting point for all kinds of exploration then as well. So those are the kind of things that people come to us with. Or just generally wanting to have a culture which is more explorative, more curious, and things like this. My company tends to specialize in organizations which are fairly risk averse for good reasons. They might work in, let's say, dangerous industries or things where they're very liable and so on. And they should be risk averse in their work. If you're making, let's say, pharmaceuticals, it's quite correct that you're very risk averse in your actual products. That doesn't mean you need to invite 45 people in CC for changing the meeting room. Yeah. The risk aversion spreads through the organization, and deciding when is risk responsible and when is when is caution responsible and when is risk a controlled degree of risk more responsible is very, very important. So that kind of stuff.
And one thing, I know we're out of time, but one thing we didn't touch on is on how doing no talking is a great way to mitigate and reduce risk. But maybe we'll touch on that another time.
Maybe we will.
Once more, where can people find you?
I'm online. I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to find me. Adam Lawrence. I have a strange middle name, which is StJohn, spelled StJohn, St. John. So Adam St. John Lawrence, and you'll find me anywhere. Thanks for having me again, Steve. It's always really fun to be here.
Thank you so much, Adam. We'll have you back again and again and again, as long as you keep saying yes. We'll keep coming back.
Thank you, my friend.
Adam. Take care.
Bye.